Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, this morning I was listening to the Young Turks and they had a video about interracial marriage, and they were talking about how a significant number of Americans think that interracial marriage is morally wrong. And they mentioned a poll that was done by YouGov. Um, so that prompted me to go online to actually find articles about this subject. So I found this article from Newsweek. So what I'm going to do is go through this article, cite some of the statistics in this article, and also I'm going to go to a report done by Pew Research and cite some of the statistics there. And then I'm going to provide my commentary. Now, I may provide my commentary as we go along. We'll just play it by ear, but I think that this is a very important subject. So I'm going to do this video. Now, also, this will be a response to some of the things that the Young Turks said in their video. All right, so let's go through this. So this article starts off by talking about how it's been just 50 years since Loving versus Virginia, and that's the case that prevents states from banning interracial marriages. So only 50 years ago, it was legal in this country for a state, for instance, to declare that it's illegal for a white man to marry a black woman or vice versa. So this article goes on to say that yet in 2018, there are a large number of Americans, nearly 20%, who feel that there is something wrong with interracial marriage, according to a new poll this week from YouGov. So this poll was asking people about various things that they think is morally acceptable, regardless of legal barriers or the legality of various things. So according to the poll, 17% of respondents said that interracial marriage was morally wrong, while 83% said it was morally acceptable. There was a bit of divide along party lines on the subject, with 28% of Republicans and just 12% of Democrats replying that interracial marriage was morally wrong. So I'm going to address that divide right now between the two parties. And, then later on, I'll discuss like my position on interracial marriages in general. So this divide is not surprising. We all know that the Republican Party is hostile to African Americans and minorities in general. That party is anti-affirmative action. That party is hostile to voting rights. We know that it was Republicans that have been pushing these efforts to suppress the black vote around the country. So this is no surprise. We know that it's the Republicans that are hostile to social programs that benefit African Americans and other minorities. Programs such as welfare, programs such as Section 8 and food stamps. We know that the Republicans are hostile to those programs. We know that the Republicans are hostile to immigrants. They have an anti-immigrant agenda. So it's no surprise that you would see this disparity in the numbers. You would see a difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. So it's not a surprise at all. And we all know about the Southern strategy among Republicans, like how the Republicans tried to appeal to Southern states, where racism was more rampant or more blatant. So they directly pandered to those people in order to bring them over to the Republican Party. So you had a lot of people who were racist, segregationist, Dixiecrats who ended up becoming Republicans because of the Republican strategy. So there's no surprise here that you would see a difference in the numbers between the two parties. And, I'm going to later on go into, my position on interracial relationships and all that kind of stuff. And many of you have heard my videos on this subject before, so you know where I'm going with this. This report also said there wasn't much of a difference among respondents by race. So 17% of white respondents felt that interracial marriage was morally wrong, compared to 18% of black respondents and 15% of Hispanic respondents. You know, one thing that's surprising about this is that more African Americans think that interracial marriage is morally wrong. Um, you know, many people will see that as a bad thing, but I don't see that as a bad thing. You know, I'm surprised that, that more African Americans see it as morally wrong, you know, in terms of the percentages, because often, you know, a lot of our people suffer from self-hatred, you know, so because of that, you have a lot of African American men in particular getting into interracial marriages and relationship more so than African American women. And we will go into that when we go over to the Pew Research Center's report. So this goes on to talk about how by 2015, 1 in 6 newlyweds were married to someone of a different race, compared to just 3% in 1967, the year of Loving versus Virginia. 29% of Asian newlyweds were intermarried, compared with 27% of Hispanic newlyweds and 18% of Black newlyweds, and 11% of white newlyweds. So white newlyweds are the ones that are least likely to intermarry. And it appears that Asians are the ones that are most likely to be intermarried. So I'm going to go over to Pew Research and go through some of the statistics there. It goes on to say in this Pew Research report, it says that 1 in 10 married people in 2015 had a spouse of a different race or ethnicity. So that's about 11 million people who were intermarried, you know, interracially married at that time. And it goes on to say this: the share who married someone of a different race or ethnicity more than tripled from, you know, the 1980s until now, from 5% to 18%. It says white newlyweds too have experienced a rapid increase in interracial marriage, with rates rising from 4% to 11%. And it goes on to say this: however, despite this increase, they remain the least likely of all major racial and ethnic groups to marry someone of a different race or ethnicity. And I think that that's because in this society, you know, there's a premium placed on whiteness. And, you know, I think that most white people want to be with white people. Um, and that, you know, this statistic bears it out. And even the statistics for other groups of people make it clear that most people prefer to be with their own. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think that there's nothing morally wrong with people preferring to be with their own. So it says this, you know, this is one part that's real important. It talks about how for blacks and Asians, stark differences in interracial marriage among genders, you know, so stark gender differences in interracial marriage among blacks. Interracial marriage is twice as prevalent for male newlyweds as it is for their female counterparts. While 1/4 of recent married black men, 24%, have a spouse of a different race or ethnicity, this share is 12% among recently married black women. So you have more black men, twice as many black men marrying outside of the race than black women. And I think that that's due in large part to a couple of factors. You know, number one is that this society promotes this idea that a white woman is the standard of beauty. You know, they promote this idea that somehow having a white woman is some kind of status symbol. And we see it all the time. We see it with these black male celebrities that, that are athletes or actors or singers, people who are wealthy. So we see that this is a common theme, where they have the white woman as their trophy wife, as their trophy, as a symbol of success, because that's what people have been taught from day one, that this white woman is some kind of standard of beauty. And I think that this has a devastating impact on black families. And, that's part of the reasons why I don't support um, interracial marriage. I'm not a fan of it, because I think that it undermines the black family. Now, let me just explain this a little bit further. I think that it undermines the black family when you have 24% of black men marrying outside of the race. That leaves a significant percentage of black women without a black husband. And also when you bring into play other factors that reduce the number of marriageable black men in the black community, I think that this, just contributes to the problem. I mean, you already have the problem of mass incarceration in the black community. You already have the problem of young black men being killed um, due to gun violence in many neighborhoods in America. You have the problem of police brutality. All these problems, eroding the numbers of eligible black men to be married. You also have the problems of economics, where you have a disproportionate number of black men without, an education, without the means to provide for a family. All of these things combined erode the black family. So that's why, that's one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of interracial relationships. Now, I'm not hostile, as I said in the prior video, to people who are in interracial relationships. I think that obviously that's their own personal choice, but I would prefer that we accept and love our own and promote black love in our community. Um, Also, there are other factors at play here in this interracial relationship issue in the black community. And one of those issues is self-hatred. You know, that's something that people don't want to touch on. That's something that people don't want to deal with. But we've seen example after example of how black people have been programmed to hate themselves, while at the same time they've been programmed to love white people and whiteness. We've seen the tests that have been done where you have the children ask questions about dolls. They are presented with a black doll and a white doll. They're asked which one is the beautiful doll, and they point to the white doll. They're asked which one is the ugly doll, and they point to the black doll. They ask which one is the smart doll, and they point to the white doll. So all the positive attributes are attributed to whiteness, and the negative ones are attributed to blackness. So I think that that is part of the problem with interracial marriages, and I think that one of the problems is that it's a manifestation of the self-hatred that haunts the minds of black people in our community. Also, another problem that I have with interracial relationships is, I think that it dilutes the black community and it promotes colorism in the black community. We already have this issue of racism in society, um, and that issue of racism manifests itself through colorism, where you have black people looking to lighter skin as more beautiful than darker skin. And so you have the divide among, people based on their complexion, and this whole situation where you have a increase in interracial marriages furthers that problem of colorism in the black community. It furthers that divide. It furthers a situation where you have biracial women, for instance, viewed as more beautiful than darker skinned black women. And you have a situation where black women are virtually being replaced by the biracial woman. We see this in film, a lot of times in these films when there's a love interest, the the love interest is supposed to be a black woman, they usually pick someone who is racially ambiguous, someone who is biracial, someone who has more European features than African features, thereby replacing the black woman with this biracial woman. And I think that that's deeply problematic. It destroys the self-esteem and sense of pride in the black community. So that's one of the fundamental problems that I have with it. Also, there's some other issues, some other issues that we have to address. Um, and I think that the way this question was framed probably shaped this as well, shaped the results. I think that if it was framed in a different way, you would have had more people indicating that they didn't support interracial marriage. Because when you frame it as a moral issue, you're going to have more people say, well, I don't think anything's wrong with interracial marriage. Because, like, as far as I'm concerned, from a moral perspective, like whether or not it's a sin to be interracially married or whatever, I don't view it as a sin. I don't view it as a sin. I just don't support it. So if someone were to ask me if I thought that interracial marriage was, if I thought it was morally wrong, I would probably say, no, I don't think that it's morally wrong. But do I support it? Do I encourage it? No, I don't. Just like I don't think that it's morally wrong to do a lot of things, but I don't do those things. Like, it's not morally wrong for somebody to, for instance, smoke a cigarette, but is it intelligent to smoke a cigarette? Is it a good thing to smoke a cigarette? Of course not. It causes cancer and people get addicted to cigarettes. So I think that if they framed this differently, I think that they would have had a different result. And I think that more people would have indicated that they don't support interracial marriage. Now, in theory, like somebody, the idea of interracial marriage, I just want to touch on that. Sometimes I think that people had this idea that if you have more interracial marriage, you'll have less racism in society. And I don't think that that's true. I mean, because you had, for the longest time, you've had interracial marriages. And you've had racism in interracial relationships occur all the time. There are reports of white men, for instance, who are in these interracial relationships with a black woman. And, again, there was a report done in Essence about this white man who basically enjoyed calling his wife racial slurs. She was like a racial fetish for him. This man made all kinds of derogatory comments about black people and all that kind of stuff, but he had no problem sleeping with a black woman. And we've seen throughout history, you have your, segregationists like a Strom Thurmond, who was, a racist, somebody who hated black people, who believed in the subjugation of black people, who believed that black people should be treated like second-class citizens, but he didn't have any problem laying down with black women. Just like the slave master, he had no problem laying down with black women. And that brings me to one of the points that was raised in the Young Turks video. They were, the brother on the panel was saying, well, one of the reasons why it's an issue for black people is because of oppression. He was talking about how people see it as dating the oppressor and this and that. And then he basically brushed that aside as if that's not important. But I think that that's a valid concern that people have. Here you are being oppressed by a group of people. I mean, that's the only way you could see it. I mean, hundreds of years of slavery at the hands of this white man, over 100 years of Jim Crow racism under this white man, and we still have problems under this system of oppression. The problems of mass incarceration, problems of police brutality, problems of inferior education, problems of wealth disparity, just blatant oppression that continues to exist. And only a fool under those kind of circumstances and under those kinds of conditions will fall in love with his oppressor, will get into a relationship with his oppressor. It simply doesn't make sense. We need to learn to love our own. We need to learn to develop and nurture our own Black relationships. I mean, we see that the Black family is crumbling. And while it's crumbling, you have Black people running out eager to be with white women and white men, when in fact, what we need to be doing is rebuilding the Black family. We have, a disproportionate number of our children born out of wedlock. We need to be focused on rebuilding the Black family. That needs to be our primary focus, rebuilding Black relationships. We have high divorce rates. We have, a low percentage of marriage in our community. That needs to be our top priority, not rushing out and trying to get into some interracial relationships. So, and there's one last thing that I want to touch on before I go, and that's this, this issue of interracial marriage being illegal at one point, and, what I think about that. First of all, like, even though I'm not a fan of interracial marriage, I do believe that people should have the legal right to intermarry. They should have that choice. I don't think society um, should prevent people from marrying outside of their race. I think that people as individuals need to be able to make their own decisions, ultimately, their own moral decisions. I don't think the state should play that kind of role and define morality for people and tell them what they can and cannot do. So while I have my personal position on interracial relationships, I don't think that, obviously, I don't think that they should be illegal. And I think that the reason why they were illegal is, part of that whole cycle of oppression against Black people. It's a part of that. Why they made interracial marriages illegal in these states and stuff like that. They had no problem with white men violating Black women. So, so that's one of the things, that's one of the disturbing things about American history. And I want to go back to this issue of the disparity between Black men and women marrying outside of the race. Because of that disparity, because of the fact that you have more Black men marrying outside of the race, I think that that should be the primary focus of our discussion. We should center our discussion around why is it that so many Black men marry outside of the race. We should discuss that, and we should address those people in our community, the Black men or whatever who encourage Black men to marry outside of the race and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you actually have channels here on YouTube that do this. You have this guy, the Mad Bus Driver, who does all these silly videos drooling over white women, placing white women on a pedestal, showing all these images of Black men with white women. I think our energy should be directed more at the men who promote that than the women, given the fact that the numbers speak for themselves. So you will probably see more videos on this channel and on my I Declare War channel addressing those subjects. So with that, I'm going to say peace and blessings to each and every one of you. I want to hear what you think about this issue. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace. So before I go, I want to address one last point. In Young Turk's video, they kept talking about how they're shocked and they can't understand why such a high percentage of people are opposed to interracial relationships in 2018. And, my response to that is simple. I mean, how can you possibly be shocked? This is a country that enslaved African people for for hundreds of years. This is a country that imposed Jim Crow on Black people for over 100 years. This is a country that only within the past 50 years made it illegal for people to have interracial marriages. So how are you surprised? How in the hell are you surprised when every other day we're hearing about the next victim of police brutality? You know, when you have the Trayvon Martins, when you have the Eric Garners, when you have the Walter Scotts and all the other endless black people being killed at the hands of these stinking pigs, how in the hell are you shocked by racism in America?